Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Stevens, and welcome to Unit 2 of our course, Literary Genres. I'm just going to talk very briefly about genres and ask you to do something in Unit 2. This will be what we'll be doing in discussion for this week. And by the way, Unit 2 is a 1 week unit. By the way, if that uh, image of myself talking there is getting in the way of seeing the screen, you can always drag that. That's a little video that's coming from my webcam, and you can always drag that to the side if it's in the way. So let's get started. Um, Unit 2 is an introduction to the genres, and what you are looking at now is the um, handout that I provided for this introduction. It includes examples of our three genres: a lyric poem by Robert Frost and a short story by Rudyard Kipling. And then down toward the end here, we have got a selection from a play that we read later in the course, and that is the famous tragedy by Shakespeare called Hamlet. So this is just a selection from Hamlet to give you an idea of what a drama or a play looks like. So that's our genre here, right, is drama. So what do we mean then by genre? We are simply talking about different kinds of things. That's what a genre is. Could be genres of painting, could be genres of music, could be genres of food or automobiles or whatever it is. We are simply talking about categories. That is how we divide a particular kind of thing up into different kinds within that kind, right? Now, the classical division of literature is into three genres according to the speaker. All right? Now, it is customary in introductions to literature, and that's what we've got now. This course is an introduction to literature. We call it literary genres because it is customary to introduce literature in terms of the different kinds. So it is customary to use these terms for the three main genres: poetry, fiction, and drama. But I want to point something out. When we use the term poetry, we are really talking about lyric poetry because, in fact, there are other kinds of poetry. So don't get confused. Just remember this. Um, there is, for example, narrative poetry, and we will be looking at an example of narrative poetry later on when we get to this thing called fiction. But when we use the term fiction, we are referring to narrative, whether it's in verse or prose. And then finally, drama means what we think of as plays, that is, things that are acted on the stage. And um, a modern form of drama that we all know, of course, is the television drama or the film drama. So drama is no longer just on the stage, it's also in front of the camera. Okay? So don't be confused by these terms. When we say poetry, we really mean a specific kind of poetry called the lyric. All right? When we say fiction, we mean storytelling because drama can be fiction, poetry can be fiction too. All right? Don't get confused. Finally, drama is what we call a play. Now, classically, we divide classical meaning going back to ancient times. Literature is divided into three genres according to who is speaking. Okay? Who we hear when we hear the words or when we see the words, being when we're reading them on the page and so on. But who is it that is actually speaking those words that we see or hear. There are other important features that can distinguish one kind of literature from another, but we begin here in this course by defining each one in terms of speaker. What I am going to ask you to do in Unit 2 is I'm going to ask you to discuss these three works um, that you see in this handout, the ones that we just looked through. All right, I'm going to ask you to discuss those in terms of what you think are the differences between them. That is, what would distinguish one from another? What do you see, for example, in this poem by Robert Frost that is different from the story by Rudyard Kipling or the play by William Shakespeare and so on? That's what we're going to do. We want to look at these things, examine them, look at the subject matter, look at the form or the shape that they take, look at the way language is being used, but above all, look at who is speaking and see if you can't tell what the differences are among those speakers. We'll talk about that um, in discussion in Unit 2. I want to go on to talk about the importance of terminology. I've been teaching literature for a long time, and one of the things that I find that's particularly frustrating for me is that people will use these terms like poem or story or play or lyric poem or whatever it might be. They will use these things interchangeably as if we could refer to a play as a poem, or we could refer to a story as a play, and so on. Please use the terminology correctly. That's one way that you will show that you're beginning to grasp these different kinds of literature. All right, a lyric poem is not a story. It's not an essay a lot of time. Now, by the way, the essay is another genre of literature that we don't really look at in this particular course, but um, it there is a kind of essay that is considered literature, and very often my students will, when they're talking about a poem, they'll refer to it as an essay. It's not an essay. Or when they're talking about a poem, they'll refer to it as a story. It's not a story. Use the terminology correctly, all right? So use poem for a lyric poem, use play for a dramatic work, use story or narrative for a narrative. Now, don't be confused if I refer during the course to the work or to the work of literature. That simply means an individual complete piece of literary writing, okay? So I might refer to stopping by woods on a snowy evening as a work. I might say, okay, the work that we are looking at this week is a poem by Robert Frost. All right. So if you see those terms, work of literature, don't be confused. We're just talking about the individual thing that we are reading. All right. So I think that's about all that I need to cover in this. We could certainly talk about these individual works here, but I think I would rather have you look at them yourself and compare them, try to get an idea of what they are about, and in particular, as I say, look at the differences in who is speaking the words. Who do you imagine is speaking the words in this poem? Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. And then when we get on to a short story, okay, it seems to me we've got a different kind of person talking. What kind of person would start with words like, everyone in the village knew that Helen Terrell did her duty? What I'm trying to tell you is the speaker here is different from the speaker here in this poem, all right? So Your job is going to be to try to compare these speakers and then finally, all right, compare them with whoever is speaking these words, a guy named Polonius, right? And a guy named Hamlet. Okay, what's the difference here? Who are these speakers? How can we distinguish them from the speakers in the other kinds of literature, the other two genres, lyric poem and narrative or short story in this case? So that's the assignment for Unit 2. Um, talk about the differences among these three kinds of literature and talk about those differences, especially in terms of who is speaking those words. Okay? Not an easy assignment necessarily, but there isn't anything in particular that I'm looking for in order to give you a good grade here. Your grade is simply going to be based on whether or not you are actively discussing, talking to each other about the differences among these three kinds of literature. So, thanks for listening, and I'll see